Good morning. Today's November the 1st. My name is Dick Rhodes. I'm the chairman of the Budget and Finance Committee. This is the Budget and Finance Committee meeting. If we would, for those who can, we'd like to stand and pledge allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We do have a quorum. We have one excused absence, but we still have a quorum this morning. I want to ask for, submit the minutes of October the 18th for approval. Hearing no opposition, so moved. Our first item on the agenda is from Mr. Finelli, and it's the September 2022 Financial and Capital Report. Pete?
Thank you, Dick. Thank you, committee members, for your time, and audience members. September 22 was a good and bad month. I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm not getting movement there, Cliff, sorry. Oh, there it goes. Are you managing it now? Okay, cool. So in our operating account for just specifically to the month of September, about 70,000 ahead. Most of that occurred, as has occurred in previous months, in golf and ancillary. Moving to the expense side, overall about 80,000 favorable. 40,000 of that is in wages, benefits, due to still being down a little bit in staffing. Our only negative in that month was in supplies and services. That's where fuel resides for all of our vehicles and golf equipment, and so we're still seeing fuel impact negatively into that beyond what we anticipated. So the overall operating margin, as I mentioned, 70 favorable on operating revenues, 80 on operating expenses, so favorable 150,000, so a good solid September. Moving to year to date, similar variances overall, 140,000 ahead on revenues, same concept, 90,000 ahead on golf. On expenses, almost the same issue as September, 240,000 overall, the biggest chunk of that coming from wages. And also the negative I mentioned earlier in supplies has occurred in almost every single month. It's just pervasive out there. So year to date, we had 140,000 ahead on revenues, 240,000 on operating. So the good news on the income statement on operating margin, 380,000 favorable year to date. Let's talk briefly about prior year. We are starting to see some impacts, particularly in operating expenses. The operating revenues are up 120,000. As you all know, we had rate hikes in bowling and golf for the fees, and also an increase in the dues, which generates a little bit less over time because it impacts only the people as they renew their membership. The big hit was in operating expenses. It was a known impact and has had some positive influence. That's where we made a sizable wage adjustment for recruiting and retention purposes in July. And so that's manifested itself against prior year. Also, inflation has impacted almost every aspect of our income statement apart from the wage adjustment I just mentioned. So overall, we're down about 550,000 against prior year. The components of that I mentioned already, the wage adjustment, and also seed cost, even though we were close to our budget. The budget called for a pretty hefty increase in both seed cost and for chemicals and fertilizers. So definitely an impact year to date. Moving to capital related, some emerging concerns here as well, particularly on the top line, APFs. No surprise, I think you talk to any realtor right now or pick up the paper and you're seeing home sales start to reduce. That's of course right in our wheelhouse. And while it's only, I say only against a context of possible impact down the line, our budget is only 30,000 short for September, but in the way we budget, we of course follow seasonality just like you would in any other thing. So our number of APFs budgeted are on the lower end of the curve, and so if home sales continue to be slow, we could see that number increase. The big impact for the month of September was almost $1.2 million, or you'll see on a slide coming up about a 4% impact in our reserve fund portfolio. The other items are right at budget. So overall, $1.24 million negative impact in the September alone. I mentioned earlier, we're still at only 30,000 behind on a year to date. I still think that could get impacted worse as we go. Year to date, the realized, unrealized is almost the same as for September. So we didn't present a lot, but July was actually a pretty solid month. August was weak on the portfolio, but September was the one month that sustained itself to the negative. So overall, against, that's fine. I think we've talked about the capital related then. Is that going forward, Cliff? Good point. Yeah, I'm so sorry. On year to date, this is where the asset preservation fees, the APF, starts to manifest itself more. When we were robust in the seller's market a year ago, you can see about $150,000 deterioration in that revenue stream. Similarly, the unrealized impact into the reserve funds was a similar amount. We were kind of neutral, and the impact in FY22 occurred from January through June. So overall, against prior year, $1.035 million down. And there, I was just talking about that earlier, APFs and the valuation change in the portfolio are the basis. So overall, on our operating margin, as we talked about, the loss of $2.8 million against the budget of $1.8 million. So we're about $1 million down. Almost all of that's occurring in the capital related portion. So that's the good news. I think we're managing well within the operating margin, which is the place you can have the most direct oversight with, but we certainly would like to see the capital related rebound. And against prior year, we talked about already, about $540,000 down on the operating and $1.3 million. So we're down almost $2 million against prior year on the overall income statement. Shifting then to the capital related portion, the budget calls for $10.8 million of identified budget items. On about the 6 or 7 of the 80 items have closed, and there is a small deficit to date, but you'll see in a second that we have more than make up for that. And you'll see in a second the same 10.8, the projected spend. I'll give the detail on that in the upcoming slide, so it's projected to be favorable. So this is a busy slide, but Cliff, if you go to the second page first, down at the bottom you see the same $10.8 million. We've issued purchase orders of $10.1. So the gap of about 700,000 remains to be identified. Off to the left of the 10.8, you'll see that we are projecting, due to some inflation and a facts and findings for the parking lot, that we're projecting to be, the Arch Johnson parking lot, we're projected to be 38,000 over. But in the middle column, right in the middle, you'll see those red items. Those are ones where there's no purchase order issued. So if, Cliff, you could go back a page. 3 items I want to bring your attention to. The first is up at the 3rd line item, that you'll notice that technically we're not over our spend because the board did authorize 74,000 of additional spend, but we still would like to maintain within our original budget if possible. And in doing that, right in the middle, you'll see 3 red items: 75,000 for lasso limewood fence masonry walls, 44,000 and 40,000 for identified items out east of the social hall. Those items are what we call new, and so they're not within the reserve study. Any other item if it was decided to be delayed, would only serve to be reintroduced back into the reserve study and would face inflationary impacts. So those 75, 44, and 40 are still up for discussion. And the good news on one of them, I think we're already identifying the gate closure was a much more expansive project, but there's some discussions going on about what's going to be used with that space adjacent to the roadway going through there, and we're not certain that we want to expend a lot of resources there until that's decided. So the gate is very important, but it's at a much lower price than that. So all said, we will never, ever issue POs that exceed our authorization, but we're most likely in very good shape once the governing board makes a decision on what they would like to curtail, if anything. So moving to the allowances portion of the capital, 400,000, we've expended 28,000. That number should look awfully familiar. There was no change from the prior month, and like I mentioned, we'll continue to give the detail of what those spends were. Those are the same 4 in the previous month. So as you've heard Cliff, the general or the county manager discuss, it's all about the reserve funds. So the reserve funds, as we entered the year, we were at about 54%. In the middle 2 arrows, we had projected inflows of about 6.6 million and projected outflows of 11.3. And when that was all said, if you go to the bottom, we were anticipating that'd be at 50%. So where do we stand on the impacts? The operating we've talked about, we're about 380,000 favorable, green. Investment earnings are running higher than budget. And APFs right now is only 23,000, but I'm very concerned about that with some of the numbers facing us in the last 3 quarters. Moving to the outflows, right now the closed PO is about 17 negative on closed POs, but anticipating that will probably move to a favorable or very neutral by end of year. The allowance it's on its best case scenario right now, so it can only go down from there, but right now we have a considerable amount we haven't spent. And of course the reserve fund valuation change is the big negative in the current status. But with all those impacted, right now we would close the year at about 49% FFB percent with the effects of those items considered. So that's the end of my presentation. Take any questions.
Does anyone have any questions from the committee? Gary?
Thanks, Pete. I'm sure that being the astute person you are, you've already got a breast pocket picture of what the end of the year looks like. Probably not something that you're very pleased to look at, but wouldn't it be appropriate to kind of have a picture of that before we start the conversation today on CAP?
Very true. So on the item up at the top, the operating cash flow, we've been running solid excess on the revenues. I pretty confident that those will hold up and at least hit budget. We do have some operating expense impacts, that one of which you're going to hear in a few minutes, involving health insurance, which could be a sizable impact, will be a sizable impact. The minimum wage is coming in higher. The inflation doesn't necessarily seem to be abating and exceeds what we've been budgeting. All that said, we have every bit of discussion within our leadership status and then our general manager ops about what we are doing to offset that on the operating. As I mentioned earlier, that's the thing you have direct control over, and we'll do everything that we need to do to maintain as good a result on that as we can. I'm very concerned about APFs. At 100 per month is our run rate. We're seeing now, and now granted, October is not necessarily historically our highest number for APF transactions. That's usually in the spring, but we're projecting to be about 80. So if we start getting 15 to 20 shortfalls, that's $80,000, manifest that over 7 or 8 months. We could be looking at $600,000, $700,000 shortfall. I consider that the bleak, side of it. Prices are abating, and that could reinstill some price point for people to move, but those mortgage rates have just got to abate probably before we see, in my opinion, any meaningful, swing back towards the buyer's market again. On purchase orders, we control everything on that, everything. There was discussion yesterday, I think brought up by Ann at the GM Ops, is what can we do to possibly curtail the current year spend, and I just identified the 3 items that would benefit the association the most. Delaying stuff within reserve study, just as I mentioned, doesn't really do anything meaningful because it's just pushing it back to another time, but you preserve the cash for now, and there's value in that for sure. The big unknown, and I say this to people, the reserve fund valuation change, it's like we've been, hit with a hammer. We know that we're getting higher yields, but the $4 or $5 million impact. But most everything you kind of read is the Fed's interest rates is absolutely starting to have the impact that I mentioned earlier on housing. When housing slows, all the manufacturing indexes tend to go with it. Just employment usually starts to decline a little bit, and that's what the Fed's looking for, is to slow down the economy. When they do that, the bond portfolio in particular should be well positioned to recover, because they only have the ammunition to the Feds do to slow or encourage growth by lowering the interest rates from the peak they're doing right now. And when that does, that the bond portfolio is going to be in good position. We've taken the hit to get to where we're at. And about the only other positive thing is yields right now are already running about 4, 4.25. We're in a lot of mutual funds and ETFs that have years, tens of years of items within their portfolio. So as they're dropping off the old bonds, they're buying at the 4%. So you're going to see the yield move to the right. And I have in our model only about 2.3%. We should see that improve to about, at least upper 2s by the end of the year. And that's worth, hundreds of thousands per year. So,
Pete, I know that a couple of big items that are going to start hitting us in January are the minimum wage increase and also the increase in health insurance. And as much as you had a crystal ball for budgeting those, are we going to be negatively impacted with now what is reality? And if so, do you have any feel for that?
We do on both, yes. Sadly, both. I thought we was being pretty proficient to say we had some concerns. You'll hear from the presentation, we thought it'd be more COVID related, but you're going to hear some of the claims are not in that arena. They tend to be in some of the more immunosuppressant type and high dollar drug related. Moving to your question though, the health insurance was projected about 15%, and you'll hear in a few minutes it's much higher than that, probably to the tune of 25,000 a month on that item alone. To the minimum wage, surprisingly, it involves many people, but given that most of those people are part-time in nature, the gap of the 7.8%, I think that's going into effect, don't hold me to that percent. It's up $1.05. We had it budgeted at about 4.5, 5. So that impact will be roughly 5,000 a month. Nothing really disastrous on that front.
One other question about the APFs. I know that they are not trending the direction that we need them to go, even though we made a 20% increase in what we're charging for the APFs from last year to this year. But more significantly, I think, are the number of inquiries we get, because that's kind of a leading indicator of what we will get. And how are those trending? Are those down also? Yeah,
sadly, at our weekly general manager meeting, and that's published for anybody to look at. I forget Riley's title, but Riley operates the CCNR and oversees membership, and he gives data on that, and on both fronts, the APFs and the inquiries were at six-year lows. So, and for anybody that wants to know, inquiry is, as she meant, a leading indicator, because it's basically the title company reaching out and saying, we have a transaction, how much do we need for the association to collect for the APF, for dues, for title transfer and things like that.
Just, I'm gonna recognize Frank Magnato in here in a minute, but at the general managers meeting, the APFs were down in October from 81, projected 81 to 56, and the inquiries from 92 to 46. So that's a very dramatic change.
I just wanted the rest of the committee to hear that.
Right, yeah. Mr. Magnato?
Thank you, Dick. So I have two questions, and we'll go to the APF question first. Refresh my memory, how much was it approved for in the new year?
4,200 is our current rate, yeah, up from 3,700.
Okay. Are you getting any feedback from the local realty business regarding the size of it, and perhaps if it's deterring people from wanting to look here?
The answer I heard was that represents on the average about 1 to 1.25%, the APF rate as the median price. And most of the realtors are saying it's not viewed as a deterrent. If you're wanting to go into a retirement community, it's standard fare to have this. So we're actually now on the lower end of our comps against the two Dale Webb communities right around us, and we happen to know more that are in the valley, and we're by no means at the high end.
Sure, okay. The other question I have is, we have projects planned now throughout the current fiscal year. Do we have the cash on hand in our operating accounts to cover the projects that have been budgeted, as well as having additional cash that we may be transferring into our reserves by the end of the calendar year? Yes.
In particular, the large spend this year was for the Grandview project that initiates in April. I'm certain the companies that are providing the pipe and the ones doing the landscaping will want their down payments, but the project's not actually slated to end until late October of next year. So we are ample operating cash to manage that.
That brings up another question, since you mentioned Grandview. With material shortages occurring in virtually every industry in the country, are we assured that we will receive the materials necessary to complete our project on time?
Yeah, we signed the contract. No vendor is going to go into this very volatile oil market in particular and say, hey, I'm signing a contract in July. Too bad, so sad that oil went up to $110 a barrel, and they got to take it on the short. So there are some clauses in there for the price of the actual pipeline, but our anticipated right now is that prices have actually abated a little bit from when we signed the contract. And item number 2, that contract is actually executing the receipt of the product. It's just price is the only variable in there, and we're not anticipating that to be a material one.
So we're not hearing anything about shortages of PVC pipe as an example that could delay the project?
And I'll defer to Todd to get back to you for sure, but I'm not hearing any of that. In fact, I know they've identified a portion of Grandview out near the maintenance yard to store all the pipe. So I know every bit of condition that I'm hearing is it's going forward, and we were smart to sign our contracts early because there are some that are getting locked out.
Thank you.
Yes, John?
Thank you.
Mr. Hobart?
This is gonna sound a little bit of a pushback, but I want to go back and explore future capital needs and wants. To me, there's a difference. Most notably, that shows up under new capital as opposed to R&R. If we were to restrict our future spending somewhat, it would seem like, to me, that would be one thing we could consider doing, and it wouldn't necessarily push projects into the future that are not projects. But I'd like you to comment a little bit on the pros and cons of restricting our capital expenditures. They've been running about $6 million a year. We have a large one coming up this year. We have a large one 2 years from now. We all know that. And those are more under the R&R. Those are, in my mind, needs, not wants. But it seems to me that we do have some flexibility to control our spending in the future because it's impossible to predict how long some of these revenue items could affect us. It's also quite unknown what's going to happen in the market. I believe we had a $1.2 million, and I'm assuming that was mostly unrealized hit on capital. We didn't change our portfolio. So that's a mark-to-market transaction. But those, if you listen to the pundits, half of them say the worst is behind us and half say the worst is to come. We don't know.
I really don't.
I'd just like you to comment on why
Sure.
couldn't we push some of those new capital jobs off or scale them back?
Excellent questions. I'm very pleased that this committee, and I believe our governing board was given an in-depth explanation of the modeling and FFB, because that modeling probably was viewed as a little bit, Pete's world before. We want this splatted all over humanity. We want everybody to have an understanding of what decisions you make. So let's go to those. There's inflows and outflows. We're entering the budget period for, most notably right now, capital is in front and center, and that's usually by design, get that discussed. It's interesting, like the backdrop right now is, that's your question is, should we be very diligent on that right now? The operating budget, though, is going to start to take a pulse in February. And you're going to hear this over and over. That's the one item truly, other than the capital spend, the new capital spend, that's the one item you really have control over. Go to investment earnings, it's going to be pretty much what it is. APFs are manageable in the rate, but you don't exactly know what transactions are going to happen. So you're casting dice into two of those three, but you can manage the operating and use that as the foundation of your capital spend. If the community wants to see continued investment, then we would strongly encourage that be the conduit for infusion into the reserve funds through that mechanism. That can be in that's not just like everybody says, in dues. That can be in rates, golf rates, that can be in bowling rates, guest fees, expense cuts. There's all kinds of things you're going to be conditioned to explore during that budget process. But by far, John, the number one item is the new capital spend that can have influence and discretionary in nature to the governing board. Doesn't come without impact. I mean, you want to keep your association fresh. That's why you're hearing master plan, front and center. That's why you're hearing 2 presentations today for at least separate items for softball. You've been made aware of some concerns that are emerging in the world of lawn bowling. So, we're always playing that, but I will say, I mean, if you decided right now 1.4 million is in our modeling, you said right now scrap all new spending for a year, you would have about a 2.5% favorable impact onto the FFB. So if that's your, you mean you in general or the governing board's decision, if that's more of value to them than the other items, spending those items, then from the CFO's perspective, a stronger reserve percent is always a good thing. But the most important thing of all is to look out 5 years. I try to avoid getting too caught up in 1 and 2 year swings. You start to see valuation changes that, as you said, could come back or deteriorate worse. FFB and inflation impact on our spend. We were just talking earlier. Could we be at the high end of construction spend? Carl alluded to it earlier that putting on a add-on to the social hall this year was much higher price. It involved an FBACs and findings to the governing board because the price was so high due to contractors being extremely busy and supply chain. What if those abate? I was just telling somebody a year ago, 2 years ago, we had our dog park. We couldn't find a bid for less than $430,000. And then COVID hit and the contractors got all hungry and we got it for about 2.25. Those are all the variables that are you as a governing board and B&F to give your recommendation want to consider. When you look 5 years out, we're actually still pretty solid, but these impacts can be highly volatile, and we want to keep our eye on them. Don't necessarily throw everything out. You have to I'm glad that we're actually being very diligent about it, and I want every item on the capital spend to be discerned and, not just rubber stamp.
Thank you. I found your points regarding where the levers are for us there to be very insightful. Thank you.
You answered a question that I was planning to ask because I was going to ask you from a pure financial perspective. What would your 2 points to us be? Keeping in mind that we all have formed opinions and we all have ideas on what we should do, but just from a purely financial perspective, keeping in mind that we're asset preservation and but still want to be progressive and innovative. What would your 2 points be that you would tell me?
Just be very judicious with the spend. Know that this is a wonderful place that when the facilities are run well and the facilities are upkept, your property values yourself usually benefit from that. And when we start to get into the operating budget, I sincerely hope that we're challenged ourselves to make sure that we do everything we can to manage our costs, but let's make sure we got a healthy infusion going into that long term. It's the one place and the one and only place on the inflows that you can actually make a difference.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the committee? Do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, thank you. Pete, as always, you've done a very professional job, very thorough, very complete. We thank you for it and your staff. Okay. We have two items. We're going to talk on item 4.0.1. It's two policies that were tabled and we're bringing back for presentation at the board. And I'm going to introduce Mrs. Redmond.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first review is FY05 that deals with insurance, property insurance, as well as liability insurance. When we started looking at this, we came to the conclusion that we are not experts on insurance, and basically found a couple of other bylaws that related or further defined liability insurance. So this project basically was handed over to Mr. Hazelwood, who is the legal counsel for Sun City West. So the redlining that you see in this particular policy was done by him. And what he's doing is basically taking the two additional bylaws and incorporating them into FY05 insurance policy. And those two bylaws deal with coverage for primarily board members, committee members committee members, as well as management. The other bylaw that he's reflecting deals with bonding of employees or anyone handling business, actually cash. I was trying to, sorry for that. So if there are any questions on this one.
So I'd just like to add here, we understand that these are time-tested and these policies have been around a long time. But in our diligence to do these, to review these, basically Mrs. Redmond asked a question. And it was very innocent. And we went to it was finally escalated to the person that could answer it was our counsel, was Mr. Hazelwood. So every change that you see in here was authored by counsel. So if you're asking the question, has counsel seen it? Yes, they wrote it. You know, they are the ones that did. So if anyone has questions, and basically the next policy that she'll be presenting is the same thing. The same thing happened, only to a much lesser scale. So if anyone has questions about this, fine. Yes, Mr. Bagnato.
Thank you, Dick. This may be a bit of wordsmithing, but I'm one of those people that'll correct you on just about anything. And so the association bylaws require, not requires. It looks like they stuck an S there on back on 1.0. And so that first line, what's that?
They removed the F.
It's deleted. Strike it.
It's just a red letter.
It is
removed.
deleted, yeah.
Yeah.
Got it.
So strike.
The other is that adequate property, business, and liability insurance are maintained, not is maintained. And so it would read, the association bylaws require that adequate property, business, and liability insurance are maintained, because you've got three separate subjects there.
I'm not a grammarian, so
Anyone disagree?
Quite frankly, I don't want to derail this simply for a grammatical
Okay, that's fine.
issue. So unless anyone else has a question about it, I would move this forward as is.
I have a clarifying question. Nothing about the content, just if I'm understanding the 3.3, 3.4, and 3.5, the additions, did those come from a different FI policy, or?
No.
Where did, just clarify, I couldn't follow where they came from.
It came from Mr. Hazelwood.
Complete
He
insertion.
rewrote,
Okay.
everything that you see in here is his edit.
And new.
And insertion, and new, yes. Yeah,
Thank you, I just wanted to know.
thank you.
Mhm.
So if
Okay.
you will move on to FI9.
Yeah, FI09 is basically just adding or special housing. FI09 is dealing with owner-developer investment fees. This would be owners or developers who take property that currently isn't under the umbrella of the association, and they want to add it to. So the question becomes, what kind of a fee is charged, especially if you're dealing with multiple housing? To this particular financial policy is adding special housing, because special housing can also come under the umbrella. By special housing, we're talking about assisted living facilities that may be present here in our area. What else? Independent living, continuing care. The only thing it doesn't include is skilled nursing facility. People coming into skilled nursing are usually very sick, and they are not going out and enjoying the amenities that we have here. So basically, to FI09, all that's really being added is special housing.
And again, I'll say that this was done by Mr. Hazelwood. There's 4 edits in here, and basically it's the inclusion of the term special housing. And the second edit was a insertion of the name of the agreement. The what the original was owner-developer facilities agreement. Mr. Hazelwood clarified it to owner-developer facility use agreement. And we don't really, our counsel says this is the appropriate verbiage to use, and we accept that. So does anyone have questions on that? Okay, thank you. Gary?
And when I first read this, I thought, why even have this policy? Because we don't have any undeveloped property in the community. And so I see that taking something here and changing it is more the purpose of this policy than anything being developed, correct? No?
No, I think there is we have to leave the door open should there be ever an opportunity for undeveloped property.
Okay.
So, I think we have to, it's not just to clarify, an issue that's closed. I'm not sure it's closed. So,
Chairman.
yeah,
Chairman Rhodes, I might remind, there's that large undeveloped property at the end of Deer Valley. 53 acres. Yeah, so, I mean, right there, you've got undeveloped property.
No, but
No, we don't. But if somebody buys it, we need to,
if they buy it and they want to come under the umbrella of Sun City West, so that those people who buy the developed property can come in and enjoy all the amenities that we have, they have to go through this facility use agreement. So the potential is there.
Mr. Bignato?
Thank you. I don't see anywhere in here that we actually have a set fee. And it seems like, is this negotiated every time? Well, it doesn't come up that much, but is it negotiated at the time that the project is proposed?
No, I don't.
The answer is yes. Governing board ultimately decides. That's a new contract, most likely extends way beyond the 3-year limit, so that will all be front and center, governing board for their decision. Ann and Dick, you guys are part of, governing board. Without going into details, there is actually a property as we speak, looking to expand. So this is not some dormant, sorry, Gary, it's not some dormant policy. It's front and center right now, so.
I was trying to frame my comments accordingly. Mr. Hurley, do you have a question? Pete mentioned the property I was going to. Okay, thank you. Okay, no further questions on this? We move forward with this to,
Yes.
And Dick, I apologize, but you make sure we don't forget to accept the financials for the governing board presentation too.
yeah, it's for filing. Thank you. Thank you, Pete. We're going to back up and ask for consensus to forward the September 2022 financials to the governing board for filing.
Yes.
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 Okay, let the record show unanimous. So our next item is item 5.01. It's for our health insurance renewal presentation. The agency is Brown & Brown. Pete, do you want to introduce the speakers?
Sure, do you guys want to come on up here? Sure, you bet. Yes, yeah. So you can see on there their names, but Paula and Charlie have been with, the Brown & Brown, or I should say the association has had Brown & Brown, formerly known as Hayes, for quite a few years. They you'll see some things that they've done for us in the past, but this was a tough year, and he's going to explain the reasons for it. But Charlie will be speaking, I believe, and certainly I want to recognize Paula Campbell. She does a lot with our association employees and keeps them educated on what the offerings are within our health insurance and 401k and things like that. So, Charlie, thank you very much.
Great, thank you.
He might govern it too.
Good morning, Chairman Rhodes and members of the committee. I'm going to introduce myself briefly, talk a little bit about kind of historical renewals over time, and then get into the details of what's driving, as Pete already referenced, a higher than expected renewal here for 2023. And then, of course, take any questions that you all have today. So in looking at let me introduce myself first. Charlie Brusack. I've been with the collective organization, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment, for about 19 years. Paula Campbell and myself were with a company called the Hayes Companies. We were acquired by Brown & Brown about 4 years ago. We've been fortunate enough to work with the rec centers for, gosh, I should have looked, but I bet you it's been 17, 18 years. So it's really been a pleasure, and we've had some ups and downs over time. Certainly, this year is a little bit more challenging. So, there we go. Great. So really just a breakdown to give you an idea of what the insurance, and this is specific to the medical and the pharmacy plan, what the increases have been on an historical basis. So if we look all the way back to 2016, which seems like somewhat of an eternity ago, it was 7.7%. We hit a stretch where we performed, and I would even say 7.7, but the rec centers performed incredibly well compared to the market, with 2017 being 4%, 2018 1.2, 1% in 19, and then no increase in 2020. That's where the story turned slightly. So if we just looked at those years, we were running a 5-year average of about 2.78% from a renewal perspective. 2021, we hit a little snag at 9.9. Last year, 19.9, and you can see that this year, 34%. So I'm going to really walk through what's driving that 34%, and kind of how the insurance company, in your case, Cigna, and how we really look at it from an underwriting perspective. So while we are getting a quote, so to speak, from the insurance company, we certainly are underwriting the risk in the background on your behalf and negotiating on your behalf as we move through that particular process. So if we look at the last 12 months, and I don't know if this has a laser on it. Is it okay? Okay, great. I don't know if I'll find it, but I'm trying. The writing's relatively small, so I was trying to point. But if we just look at the top line, our medical loss ratio for the past 12 months has been 169.4%. The insurance company would like the plan to run it at approximately 85%. What does that mean in essence? It means that for every dollar of premium that the rec centers pays in for this particular insurance, the insurance company's paying out almost $1.70, okay? So as you can imagine, that's not really the goal, and the stated goal is around 85%. And the reason why that 85% is important is, in originally 2010, and then it sort of, tiered in over time. The insurance companies are required through the Affordable Care Act to manage the administrative expenses of the plan. So what it says is basically for a group of your size, they've got to spend about 85% of the total premium in claims. Now, when looking at that, that's in aggregate based on their book of business. So clearly there's going to be situations where less is spent for one employer and more is spent for the other, but they need to average that over time. And if they don't, then they owe the pool, if you will, back dollars, okay? So that's why that 85% is important. Looking at the prior year, we were running at about 126.3. So again, for every dollar of premium, basically paying out $1.26. In real dollars, which I think sometimes percentages sort of are just that, right? What does that really mean? So that second bullet point really just kind of looks at the last 24 months and talks a little bit about what the rec centers has paid in from a premium perspective. If you can see that or following along, around $3.245 million. During that time, and we're going to talk about this in greater detail as we move through the presentation, Cigna has paid out about almost $7 million. So you can see there's a pretty significant delta between premium collected and premium paid out of about $1.4 million. So in terms of just the size of the plan, you do have as of this presentation being pulled together, or the renewal, about 136 of your employees are covered under the health plan. So not 100%, obviously, of your population selects to be on the plan, but you've got about 136 on the plan today. They also bring other dependents with them, either children, spouses, et cetera. So total is 256 members that are covered on this plan. You can see, just looking at the previous renewal, that we've remained relatively consistent over time. And you'll see on the next, or on one of the next slides, that it has remained relatively consistent over time. In terms of kind of how does the insurance company look at it? So when they're looking to rate you as an organization, they look at the size of the organization, and then they apply basically through a table, and all the insurance companies, including Cigna, have this, really a credibility rating. Doesn't mean you're not 100% credible. What it means is that for the purposes of insurance, you're 61% credible. What does that really mean? It means they're using your claims experience to develop the rates, about 61% of the rates. The balance, or 39% of the rate, is born from the pool, okay? So if you were a 500 employee group or 1,000 employee group, depending on the different tables that the insurance companies utilize, your experience would be 100% of what they utilize for purposes of projecting the renewal, because you're not that size, they do bring in a pooled or manual rate. So just kind of looking at, based on the experience, and I put some PM, I'm sorry, that's insurance jargon for per member per month, okay? I should have written that out, I apologize. But when we look at just the experience, almost $1,000 per member per month is what the experience is running. Mostly tied up in large claims, which we'll get into in a second, but nonetheless. So if we look at the pooled rate, it's about $691. So the experience is about 44% higher than the pooled or manual rate, which isn't obviously desirable. We also, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I think it's important to mention that within your fully insured contract, you have what's called a pooling point. That pooling point set at $100,000. Okay, what does that mean? It means that if you have a claimant, which you have had claimants, plural, over $100,000, they take anything over that $100,000 and they throw that out of the experience for purposes of trending your claims forward. The purpose of that is to provide some protection within the policy to hedge against large claim activity. You're paying for that too. There's a pooling premium that's included in the total premium, but nonetheless, it provides some additional assurance, at least for large claim activity. So we're just listing 3 claims here. I do have in parentheses directly below, if I look at just claims above $25,000 during this particular renewal period, it's almost $2.17 million, which is greater than really what the total premium is. So you can see that it's really large claim activity that's driving the cost. The 3 that we reference above, the paid amounts, $425, $249, and $228, the only reason why we pulled those out and are highlighting them is that the insurance company, in this case again, Cigna, has their nurses basically review the large claim activity and say, okay, what's the diagnosis, prognosis, et cetera. And these were the 3 claimants. And we chose not to put the diagnosis on here because not knowing exactly what the makeup of this particular crowd would be. But nonetheless, the nurses are anticipating 170 on the top claim, 180 and 90 on that third claim. Again, could be higher, could be lower. That's just sort of what the nurses are projecting at this point. So getting to the point that you probably really want to talk about is that the initial renewal was at 41.17%. When we just look at experience, okay? So I talked about the pooled manual rate versus experience rate. If we were 100% credible, right, we would anticipate that the renewal would have been around 60%, okay? Because you're not 100% credible, the manual increase is around 11.27%. They weight and blend that at that 61% credibility and 39% to formulate that 41.17. So with that as the backdrop, obviously we knew immediately that we needed to market the plan. Market meaning go to the competing carriers that could provide the same level of service and insurance to your employees, and see if we could find something that was more suitable for the group. Unfortunately, based on the claims experience, the primary competitors, United Healthcare, Blue Cross of Arizona, and Aetna, all declined to quote based on your claims experience. Okay, just as a little bit of backdrop, having some history, you've been with each of those 3 carriers as well at some point during our tenure with you all, but unfortunately they did not come back. So we did, as you're probably aware, we work for commission that's in the premium. With such a high increase, we went ahead and reduced our commission by about $20,000 in the overall, and then ultimately with that commission reduction, got to a 34% with Cigna. So this next slide is my point to you. thanks. So this is relatively small. I think some of you have them printed, but we just wanted to break out and already talked about this really in the summary, but nonetheless, this gives you a more detailed look at the month-by-month claims. So this is really representing September of 2020 through August of 2022. I do want to mention, though, because it was brought up on a couple occasions, you know, what was the impact of COVID? Is this being driven by COVID? And I've got a couple answers to that. I'll talk about the actual dollars associated with COVID, and then I'll talk about some of the impact associated with COVID that we know at this point. So if we just look at the 2020 plan year, as you know, so March of 2020-ish, right? COVID became part of all of our lives. And in that particular, call it 10 months, we collectively, Cigna, spent about $290,000 in COVID-related claims. Okay, so as a percentage of the overall, not a significant amount, but certainly something that we, you know, didn't anticipate. I don't think anybody did. In 2021, about $166,000 in total, and then looking at 2022 on a year-to-date basis, $123,000. So that's really tied up in any kind of services at either the hospital, doctor's office, testing. Once the vaccine came out, you know, vaccinations. Now, it doesn't represent the total cost. It represents the cost that ran through your medical plan, right? Because we all know that we could have gone out to State Farm Stadium and gotten a COVID vaccine and did not, in most cases, present our insurance card. So there's other expenses, but outside of the plan. The thing that I will mention, though, is that during that time, as you all are well aware, a lot of the facilities were closed down for what was being termed elective surgeries, or, you know, things that didn't need to happen at that particular moment. So while your scenario here is a little bit more dramatic than what we're seeing in the market, there is a little bit of a bounce back for some of these services that were unable to be performed during COVID, right? So some could be impacted by that, but we don't know that, you know, exactly what that looks like, but we know that there's some impact there. So how does this report read? It's a 24-month claims experience. At the end of the day, we're looking at, you know, the total cost. So on each month, the in-network, out-of-network expenses, drugs, total claims. And this is where I got those numbers from, where I mentioned kind of in the executive summary, about $4.67 million in total claims against premium of about $3.2 million, again, driving that 144.1% loss ratio. I'm not going to go into detail, but you can kind of see, looking at the total employees. And when it says total subs up there, that just means total subscribers or your employees. Again, the insurance industry tends to use some different words. And then total members is inclusive of your employees and then the dependents that they bring along with them. All right, so that's the end of my presentation. I am, and Paula, I may defer to her as well, but able to answer any questions that you all have.
Thank you. Questions from the committee?
I have.
Ms. Redmond?
I think my question is more a question that I would refer to Pete, and it has to do with employee contributions. Are the employees making a contribution to this premium, and if so, what percentage? And then my second question is, if so, what percent of this 34% increase, what percentage will be passed to the employees, again, if that's going to happen?
I'll maybe reference Charlie for comparability of our rates versus the industry. Right now, a little history, 80% is borne entirely by the association. 20% is withheld from the 136 people who opt to have our insurance. That was improved for employee and recruitment and retention purposes last cycle, and it now resides at 85% borne by the association. No question, not only are we going to impact that I mentioned earlier to the amount I mentioned, but yeah, it's disappointing, but every employee will likely see that same 34% hike on their premium.
Okay, thank you.
Now, I would maybe ask Charlie, if you care to, about how our 15 or 20% plan is compared to, most other plans out in this size, employer, if you care, if you do.
Yeah, I can spend a little bit of time there. Benchmarking, so Pete's question really is, what are your competing, employers doing in terms of insurance for their employees? Because as you all know, benefits is a huge consideration, right, in making a decision to join an organization, more so now than probably ever. I say benchmarking. I don't have a benchmark report, so I'm going to go off of just kind of our book of business and then what we see in the marketplace. I would say that from an employee only perspective, you all are in line, right? So you offer benefits across 4 different tiers of coverage, right? So if I'm an employee here at the rec centers, I can choose to enroll as an employee. I can choose to enroll as an employee plus spouse. I can choose to enroll as an employee plus child or children, multiple. Or I can, if I've got a spouse and dependent children, I can choose to enroll as a family. Okay, so when I speak in terms of benchmark on the employee only, I would say right in line. I would say, and I know this is a lot to do with just wanting to be employer of choice, difficult recruiting folks and so forth. I would say you're probably a little bit above benchmark on the other tiers of coverage, meaning you're probably contributing a little bit more than what the market. That's not a good or bad thing necessarily. It's a decision from a cultural perspective, and then from a recruiting and retention perspective. Did that address your question, Pete? Thank you.
It did.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman Rhodes. This is probably more directed toward Pete. I've got a couple of questions here, but do we make a distinction in the percent of premiums that employees pay, first of all, on what tier they are, and second of all, if they're full-time or part-time?
Full-timers are the only ones eligible for insurance.
Full-time are the only ones
yeah,
eligible. Okay, thank you.
I think he did give the denominator, but if he didn't, it's about 175 roughly. And if I have a spouse that has Banner or Blue Cross, and I'm piggyback onto that, then quite bluntly, the association benefits because we're not paying for that health insurance. I forgot your second question.
Well, I wondered, do we distinguish between the amount the association pays between those 4 classes?
We do not.
We do not?
The premiums escalate pretty much in line with the level of coverage that you're requesting.
But the employee still pays the same premium no matter whether they're just the
no, I
employee?
have the opposite, the same percentage.
Oh, same percentage.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And something that I encountered when I was in the work world and working on these type of things, do we have any way of tracking when we have an employee who has a spouse that could be getting coverage, but they think, I'd rather we both have the same coverage, and so I'm just going to go with yours. It's going to save me a little bit of money, but that employee's spouse could be getting coverage somewhere. Do we have any way of looking at things like that?
It's funny you mentioned that. Cliff is our county manager, and I were talking about this very topic, that some employers actively have counselors. I don't think I believe I'll have to ask HR. I know I see them back there, but I don't believe they have any authority to mandate anything. This would be simply educational. Now, I'm actually in this very scenario. My wife's a little older than me. So I have right now her with, I'm an employee plus spouse. When she becomes Medicare eligible, with that being the primary one and that we would probably do some education on, what am I paying for that coverage on my premiums versus what she would pay on Part B or a supplement or enrolling in a HMO plan? Most likely, it's going to be cheaper. So I can already tell you I'm gearing up to remove that and everybody wins, me too. I think we can do some education in that realm for people in that category, which I don't know if that's a significant number, but I think anything should be explored. But it can only, to my knowledge, I know it can only be educational. You can't demand anything like that.
Right, and I certainly don't want to take anything away from our full-time employees, and I understand the necessity of benefit, but I do think, they need to continue. If we see an increase, they need to see the increase too.
And they are.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Hobald?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to applaud you, Charlie, for the courage to come before us with numbers that are decidedly negative, but we have to face them. And you did that, and you did it very well. So I thank you for that and for a very enlightening presentation that was courageously presented.
Thank you.
I might have missed this in your presentation. How long has Cigna been our carrier?
I'm going to defer to Paula. Yeah, I would say the better part of 7-8 years.
Okay, that's good. And then I have a question again to Pete on this. Is the health coverage that we offer give our employees the option of fee-for-service, or is this an HMO? I see a column here of in-network and out-of-network, and it triggered the question. Thank you.
I can address it unless you.
Nope.
Yeah. So you have what's considered a PPO, not an HMO. It's fee for service generally. I say generally because there are in all of these policies some capitation for particular services. In the case of Cigna, they capitate the mental health services. So everything's primarily fee for service. It's PPO. You do have, they call it an OAP, Open Access Plus network, but that's analogous to a PPO. It's not an HMO. It's not a gatekeeper. You have in and out of network benefits.
Thank you.
Mr. Miller?
Can we flip back to your table of the last 24 months?
Might need you, Cliff. Thank you.
So clearly from January 22 through August, we had 3 very large claims. The preceding months, we really didn't have anything that approached that back to September of 20. So I'm kind of trying to correlate, and if we went back that full 7 or 8 years, however long Cigna's been our carrier, is this an aberration in terms of this time period where we had so many big claims compared to historical data?
Yeah, I mean, if just looking at these 24 months, the answer to that would be yes.
Yeah, but
driven
I'm thinking farther
by
back.
large claims. We bounce a little bit. I don't have that information, unfortunately, with me today to really address the specifics. But you will see month to month, bounces. And if
Yeah, because I'm kind of looking at this table where, you've got an extended time period where things were really pretty
Right.
calm.
right,
And I would guess, given the size of the association and the number of people enrolled in the plan, I would be surprised if there's not 1 or 2 high-cost cases per year.
there absolutely is. So part of the negotiation process that we go through with Cigna is to say, hey, what's the large claim activity? What's the likelihood of ongoing claims from these particular individuals? So I don't want to pat ourselves on the back, but in our negotiation, we were able to have some pretty significant conversations around, the expectation of large claim activity going forward, which gives us sort of some leverage because we've got tables and actuarial, that we utilize in that negotiation. So I would agree with you that in each, if I had that information in front of me, I can assure you that in each of those years, you did have some large claim activity, but certainly not to the degree you're having right now.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Chairman Rhodes. I have one more question. This is probably for Pete, but have we evaluated an increase in the out-of-pocket or deductible or whatever you want to call it for our employees? And how that
Did you
might
want to
affect the premiums?
discuss the options? My first answer is when you shift response, and your premiums are going to be based upon all the negotiations. Once you set that in, it's my understanding, once you set that in stone, then here are the options that emerge from that. The insurance companies aren't naive. They're going to say, if I'm going to offer lower premiums, then I want, more out of pocket on the employees. I mean, it's just a straight algorithm that usually ends up being to the same place for them. At this juncture, the decision for those 4 was status quo because it hits all of our needs, and we just did not want to you're still going to have a rate hike to employees that we talked about, and to have them potentially face even more out of pocket, I think would move us far back from where we want on a recruitment retention standpoint right now. So it already exists, by the way. You do have, as he said, 4 different plans. You can opt for higher out of pocket, and maybe he can explain that. I didn't see that graph, but we got it when we were looking at the presentation. So I'm guessing that either Paula or Charlie know about the inner workings of that, but to expand it and make it even higher deductible was not something we chose to do.
So employees do have the option to choose their deductible
absolutely.
base, and they'll pay a premium accordingly.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I believe that's correct, right?
Yeah, there are three different plan options, one of which is an HSA plan option.
Mr. Hobald?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I realize you may not be able to answer this question, and if you can't answer it honestly, just say so. It's okay. My question is, given the general press information, one can assume that healthcare costs are rising, drug costs, hospitalization, doctor visits. In the terms of this 34% increase, is there any way to get a sense of how much of this is because of the high claim activity we've had the last couple of years, and how much of it is just general increases in healthcare?
I can generally answer your question honestly.
I can expect nothing more.
Thank you. So I would say the way to maybe look at that would be to look at, and if we go back to the next slide, Cliff, if you don't mind. Great. So where I put on there that, where am I looking here? Sorry. Yeah, right. Manual increase 11.27% versus the experience. I would say that's a combination. So focusing clearly just on that manual increase, I would say that the industry is definitely challenged by. I mean, the reality is large claims. There's more of them. I'm not just talking rec centers at this point. There's more of them, okay, and they're more costly. And the good news in that, right, is we have procedures and drugs and stuff, right, very technical, that allows for things that weren't, able to be done, 20 years ago. So from a medical perspective, there's significantly more ways now to treat, patients, but those patients or the cost associated with that is significantly more as well. So I think, I would say there's pressure, certainly inflationary pressure. Medical inflation probably for the first time is less than regular inflation. I mean, you know, it's kind of interesting. And I'm a little bit concerned, frankly, looking forward, because when a Cigna goes out and contracts with a hospital, or they contract with a medical practice or whatever, drugs and so forth, when they contract, generally speaking, they're 3-year contracts, generally speaking, okay? So, you know, they stagger those contracts so that, you know, if one provider decides they don't want to be in the Cigna network anymore, it doesn't, you know, they don't all come up from a contractual standpoint at the same time. So my concern is this, that, you know, the same pressures that you all are facing, frankly, we're facing, you know, as an organization as well, is that, you know, increased wages, increased cost of everything. So these contracts that the insurance companies have negotiated with providers are based on old sort of information, right? So as these contracts come up every 3 years and staggered, I think we're going to see some pretty significant pressures on reimbursements because of the cost structure, hospital cost structure, the medical practice cost structure, and so forth. So I think it's going to be challenging. And that's me thinking that, as well as me researching. So I tend to read a lot of PricewaterhouseCoopers has a really good report. Siegel, which is frankly a competitor of ours, put out an incredible report this year that sort of kind of highlighted, incredible meaning not good, but incredible in terms of just the way they organize the data and some of the concerns that they have. So I don't know if that addressed your question exactly, but
It's a tough question to answer directly. I was girding myself for next year and the year after, so forth, with the leading question. Thank you, though. I appreciate it.
you're welcome.
That's a perfect segue. Cliff, would you move to the claims history again? So this was helpful this year as well. So talking with Charlie and Paula, from the CFO perspective, and quite bluntly for the B&F, as we approach the upcoming budget cycle, I asked them, is this total claims some kind of sacred information? Is there not some way we could be seeing? Because when I was a hospital CFO, we had our own managed care plan, and I will tell you, good news is Cigna is so pervasive, and there's such a market presence that they, extract a lot of the discounts that he's referencing from when I was a hospital CFO's perspective. But look at the out-of-network. Those out-of-networks for plans can be literally into huge sums when you've got a member sitting in a hospital in Maine with no contract. You have to pretty much pay what they bill. So Cigna has this extremely system-wide, nationwide network. So we're protected on that. To the claims column, I'm going to request that I believe they told me we might be able to get it at 6 months interval. So from September 1 to right in the budget period, at least I'm going to be aware of the good or bad that David was referencing. And doesn't mean that the following 6 months are good or bad before we actually get into the renewal period, but I think we can have an idea of what we want to structure our FY24 budget to be predicated on. Knowledge is always more helpful, so.
I do have a couple questions for you. In my past life as a hospital administrator, we lived and breathed third-party collection and third-party reimbursement. And I would also echo Pete, the jumping out at me was your out-of-network expenses, which tells me that, you know, you've got that locked down. I would also make a comment, and I know the answer to this, I think I do, but I want to hear it from you. We always had pre-certification nurses that would work with the clinical team. And I presume you have the other side of that coin, you know, from an insurance perspective.
Absolutely. So there are several services within the services available to your employees that are pre-auth, pre-cert.
And I want to hear from you that there is no workman's comp or third-party liability in here?
No.
Okay. I'm just aghast that we're looking at a 34% increase. I've never heard that, you know, and I don't even know what to say about it, other than, you know, evidently we have some catastrophic illnesses, you know, the 3 cases that you talked about. I don't know what time period that is, but, you know, it's an ongoing, almost $500,000 in one case. So the other thing, and I'm a bit embarrassed, but I'm not to say this, I do see that you reduced your premium or your commission by $20,000, and I applaud you for that. I guess the businessman in me says that you could have dug deeper. You know, if you really wanted to extend that hand, you know, I would have liked to seen more, but you know, that's purely editorial. So, thank you for your time, for your bad news that you have. Actually, it isn't bad or good. It is what it is. It's 34%. We don't like it. There's nothing we can do. I'm a little alarmed when you talked about Blue Cross and the other companies that wouldn't even touch it. So are we held captive here? I mean, it sounds to me like we have very limited options. You know, kind of a so what, 34%, so what? You know, what can you do? I mean, I see very little that we can do here other than start shopping around if we wanted to do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, this year, and this, yeah, so what Paul is referring to is they didn't quote because they would have come in higher, okay, based on the experience that they reviewed, their manual rates and so forth. And keep in mind that this is an annual process, right, wrong, or indifferent, where, you know, in some years, everybody's quoting, right? In other years, others, you know, they're not. And we're kind of in sort of that unfortunate situation right now where we are facing, you know, significant claims experience, a significant increase, and the competing carriers are just saying, we can't do it for any less, based on the way that Cigna has underwritten the renewal. So no, I wouldn't say captive, but I would argue a little bit this year, sort of captive. But from an ongoing perspective, we would anticipate if things improve that we'll have options going forward.
Thank you. I understand the implications of it, and I understand the position. Captive was probably the wrong word. I would say no wiggle room, or very little wiggle room. So thank you again for you. Oh, Mr. Brignato has another question.
I do, actually, and it just came to me. So it is correct that in part rates are determined by the size of the pool of members. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, generally.
Generally, okay. And so perhaps this is something, I don't even know if it's feasible. Bill Schwind is in the audience. He's the general manager. Could we not partner with Sun City Grand, perhaps even Sun City Festival, to develop a much larger pool of people and then have all of those people covered under one policy, increasing the size of the pool of insured employees dramatically? Is it possible?
We hold, I'll answer that. We have not introduced that, but I literally have a meeting with the CFOs next week. So we'll open that discussion.
I knew you'd have something, Pete. Frank, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, do we have any questions from the audience? Okay, thank you. We'll move on. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. The next item is item 5.02. It's for capital presentation. Carl Wilhelm, and I don't think Carl needs an introduction at all. Thank you, Carl.
Thank you, everyone, for having me here today. So in my presentation to you today, I have two documents. I have a PowerPoint and I have the original paper document that we're going to put up first. This paper document is the same proposed capital budget sheet that we presented to you last month. And the only thing that the CFO and I have done differently is we've added the columns for the November changes. We're going to show the changes balance and a little bit of detail. The PowerPoint that I have today will reflect the November column. So I'd just like to quickly go through the paper document and hold all questions unless there's something in a new category that I might bring up until I give you the PowerPoint presentation. So starting off in the paper document, we have the new CR13 capital requests. You will see that under the softball field bleacher area renovation, I've had time to do a much more in-depth discussion with vendors and products. And originally I presented that with $1 million budget request. And I used the term value engineering. So I believe that project can be done for $350,000 as opposed to $1 million. Moving on down to golf course buildings, electrical mechanical assessments. After a recommendation to hold off the assessment until further notice, we are removing that from the proposed budget, so that is a deduction of $93,100. After further investigation and air quality test concluded that we do not need a change in the Kuntz art room, we have removed that from the budget for a deduction of $50,000. Moving down into a little further down the list, this is an ad. The social hall ceiling lighting renovation design and engineering. You'll hear a little bit more about this, but we are asking for some design and engineering fees to investigate a renovation to the social hall ceiling, an ad of $25,000. That covers all changes in the new category. Moving on to R&R. Softball field outfield fence replacement. Vendors did provide updated estimates to me for this budget purpose, and those estimates came back at a higher amount of $50,851 to be added to the budget. Bocce courts flooring replacement. You will see a significant change here. Our previous information that we had in the reserve study tool showed the bocce courts flooring replacement is $51,346. I received my vendors' estimates back from two significant companies. One came back at $247,000 and one came back at $197,600. That caught me by surprise, and after doing a little more research, we had the tool estimating a carpet change for only the additional carpeting that was done approximately 8 years ago. So this is a big change in our budget proposal, so $146,254. I'll talk a little bit more about that in my presentation. Moving down, the Facilities Maintenance Department received quotes for a pool heater replacement. That came in at this year at a much higher cost, $77,250 for an ad of $28,416. After further discussion, the Facilities Maintenance Department is investigating a solution for improved mobility of the existing chairs. So in craft rooms 3, 4, and 5 at Kuntz, we are holding off on replacing them chairs, and we feel like we can come up with a solution and save $51,153. The final line item, chemical controller replacement, has been removed. Facilities maintenance has a workaround, and we will be pulling that $6,931 out of the proposed budget. Moving over to golf R&R, golf maintenance equipment. The CFO and Todd Patty have done a inventory reduction evaluation, and they have removed $310,966 out of that proposed request. You will see the next two line items are ads. Todd Patty has asked for Lakes Shoreline Repairs, Stardust number 14, $231,855. And the Echo Mesa Irrigation System Design Work, previously, the same request previously asked for Grandview to be added for $206,000. The same golf maintenance CFO and Todd Petty reduction in evaluation for maintenance vehicles was done, and you'll see a reduction of $107,572 in inventory. Grandview's golf course slurry seal is a little bit more expensive. After vendor estimates, they reflect the cost to be $20,119 more. And then finally, golf course lake aeration number 1 and 8 was a deleted request, so that $6,956 is being removed from the budget request. Nothing has changed in the allowance category. And I would like to move on to my presentation if there's any quick questions. Very good. Cliff, if you could throw up the PowerPoint. Thank you. This PowerPoint follows the document, the paper document, exactly with the November columns changes. We'll start it with new capital requests, CR13s from clubs. The Coon Softball Field Clubhouse expansion still remains. It is a $1 million request. A little more additional information, and probably most significant is, unless other determinations are made, option A and option B really is not capable. So I just need that recommendation understood that the current structure cannot support the request without demolition or rebuild. So that is a decision that you have to think about. And then option B would be for the construction of a new clubhouse of 2,000 square foot, would require significant investment and development planning and utilities if recommended. So 1 million is a pretty solid guesstimate, and I would, if there's a positive recommendation going for this project, we should probably categorize this in the multi-year planning. Sorry. Pete, if you could go back 2 slides. The other way. One more. Coons Artificial. One more. Coons Softball Field Bleacher Area Renovation, $350,000 to $1 million. Again, with the comments that I made earlier about value engineering and meeting the club's requests, I believe that I can promote this project for $350,000 by buying new bleachers and renovating the concrete areas around first and third base line. Advance 1 slide, thank you. The Coons Softball Field, full field artificial turf. This would be a request for replacing the entire outfield grass area with artificial turf. It does allow for 1 additional day per week for scheduling play. It could replace yearly irrigation costs, environmental services maintenance, field maintenance, and seasonal overseeding expenses, and that is averaged at approximately $25K per year. One would assume that that should have been more, but quite honestly, if you're removing the staff that is involved, the hours, that staff is just being redistributed to the other areas that are needed at the rec center. So you will not see a reduction per year due to staffing. Artificial turf, it currently exists in the infield and at the perimeter walking track. It would also require a maintenance program and a larger piece of maintenance equipment. The turf is an 8-year limited warranty and an expected useful life of 12 years. And then finally, the last CR13 request is for the softball field batting cages, 55,600. Nothing has changed in my original discussions with this. We have good information. We have estimates from the manufacturers of the equipment needed for this project. And I have solid discussions with vendors for concrete and cages. So 55,600 still remains. I'd like to take a break here if there's any questions. I will do this at every section.
Can you go back to the previous slide? So the comment about requires club maintenance program and larger maintenance equipment. Okay, so who buys the larger maintenance equipment?
So there already is a club maintenance program because we have existing turf, and that we already do have a piece of a piece of equipment significant for that amount of turf. I have not dove into the larger maintenance equipment at this point, so it's the same machine as we have now, just larger, and that would be up for discussion.
Okay, so we have no idea what something like that would cost.
I do not.
Okay.
Just a little bit of recalculation as far as the batting cages go. The picture here, you can see, excuse me. How we doing? Better? Sorry. The calcs there, that's typically maybe a 6, 7 foot, maybe 8 foot entrance gate there. The loft of that cage, typically that's designed, I think, for somewhere along fast pitch or a baseball type cage for softball. With the arc pitching that's required, that fence would need to be a little bit higher. And I would just want to make sure if we're going to move forward with that, we got the right amount estimated as far as those cages go, because I think that would have to be a much taller situation. If you look at softball pitching machines inside buildings, as far as internal batting cages go, if you look commercially, those ceilings are closer to 25, 30 feet. So just a heads up on that one.
Mr. Chairman, I have a
Rubald?
couple of questions. On the first slide, I'm not sure I understood your terminology. I want to make sure that I understand it and everybody else does. When you were talking about multi-year planning.
Yeah,
Could you elaborate, make sure everybody is on the same page?
The project planning process each year has this cycle that we're in now, which is budget proposal. The next phase is your recommendation to the governing board, positive or negative, or whatever comments you make. Once that is compiled, the GM will receive the initial budget, and then the governing board has the cycle per policy that determines, are these 1-year cycled projects, so implement the funds, and next season I would, if approved, I would do the work, or are we going to break it into multiple years, so a year for maybe design and architecture, and then a year for budgeting, and then a year for implementation.
Perfect. So for my purposes, this job can be split without adding additional costs. It can be split into multiple years and if we chose. Yeah, just confirmation if I'm.
If this were to be positively recommended forward, then I would suggest that a year of architectural fees is what's implemented in this budget, and then the determination once the next budget comes around what the cost of the project actually is, because we have the information to work off of.
Perfect. Thank you. Second, last question for this go around. I just did a bit of a calculation, considered a back of an envelope order of magnitude. But on the third proposal, the synthetic turf, using your hard estimate of $25,000 a year savings, taking the $150,000 and dividing it by the 12-year useful life, I came out with that the association, the owner members could save net about $12,500 a year by doing that. We got a saving stream, we got a cost stream, which would make this one very attractive, I think. So that's the last part of the comment. Are my calculations good enough for back of envelope?
Very good.
Ms. Brown?
Yes. Thank you. Carl, as I recall, there was something about the fence and the artificial turf should more or less be married together as a project for what purposes? Is that correct? Am I thinking along the right lines?
I appreciate you bringing that up. So I was going to discuss that in the R&R section, but yes, I did make comment at the October meeting that if there was any positive recommendation to the artificial turf, we do have an R&R project for replacing the outfield fence line. And the two should go hand in hand due to the fact that you'll have vendors mobilized on site. The replacement of the fence on the exterior is an R&R, so at some point it should be done. And the cost savings would be because the vendors on site, the artificial turf that is at the warning track is going to get pulled back, and the two would be best done at the same time. Otherwise, we might have significant cost impact by adding artificial turf at a later point and redoing the work again.
Mr. Magnato?
Thank you, Dick. I have a question about the bleachers first. And I saw elsewhere in the packet, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead or not, but there was a form that had been filled out, had been redacted, I think, where someone had taken a fairly serious fall in the bleachers. And is this something that occurs frequently? Are we seeing people getting hurt trying to get in and out of the bleachers?
This would not fall under necessarily my purview, so I'm not aware of anybody taking any significant fall out of the bleachers that we have a documented case. It's not been brought to my attention. This project came about from the club saying that they would like a safer atmosphere, better access to ADA restrooms, and the bleachers were aged a bit sharp and congested. So I'm not aware of any trips, falls, or hazards.
April 7th, 2022, according, there's an accident injury report. It's in the package. I don't know where it is in the slideshow, but I believe it might be before this. And so I'm reading it here, and somebody hit her head. A woman fell on the step and hit her head. And if that certainly is a common occurrence, I think that fixing the problem is probably pretty much a priority before we kill somebody.
Certainly.
That's my opinion on that.
My question would be, and I don't know if it's to you, Carl, and it's really on the same line as Frank's, is are we compliant with ADA?
We are. We are.
So we are compliant. So if there are accidents, we're still compliant. Now, Frank has a good point. You know, if this is a recurrence, we probably need to address it. But as long as we're compliant, we're ADA compliant on this.
Yeah. The
So
areas,
there's nothing to correct an ADA issue, the width of the aisles, the accessibility.
we are currently compliant.
Thank you. Pete, did you have a
Yeah,
question?
CFO interjection here. 3 items, hope I can remember them all. John, I'm not contesting your numbers, but I did some quick math. I think that's like 40,000 a year, and
I misread. I was
So-
reading 150 until I put my readers on.
gotcha.
Now I got the
Gotcha.
450.
So
I'm with you on that.
it's fine. It's still a pretty
It's a pretty
healthy,
sizable
right?
payback, but it's
Yeah.
not what I said.
So 2 things that aren't placed on here, so I'm going to ask you to kind of tuck these into your knowledge banks, and they are certainly very at introductory level. These are not like locked in stone that they will come about. But we're starting to hear what could potentially even be a game changer for, and Bill has brought this up before, that there are some seeds grass seeds that are being developed that could be much more water tolerant, could be much more, and if that ever manifests itself, it would be just a game changer for watering, for overseeding, exponential numbers. And I would caution us potentially to maybe explore that before we expend those kind of funds. I'm not saying no, but just be aware that there might be some alternatives that are just in the infant stage of discussion that may apply here. Item number 2 is, and Bill has spoken extensively about that in other forums, maybe to you guys. This water doesn't come from our groundwater like that does occur on our courses. This comes from EPCOR, from potable, if you will. And so that's where some of those savings start to emerge on the good side. But if EPCOR and, on a broader sense, water issues manifests themselves to the extent that it's getting the national attention, i.e. Congressional even intervention, you can almost assure that somewhere along the line there's going to be some funding coming in to address that. That's just an opinion of mine. And I don't know if we're kind of jumping ahead, making the expenditure when I'm making a projection here, perhaps some monies all of a sudden appear to displace these kind of water things and they fund that. Now, that's just a conjecture. You don't quote me and say I know anything beyond what I just said. But just be aware that there's a backdrop there that, unlike our groundwater, which Bill has alluded to is completely headed up by ADWR, groundwater rights, that's the golf courses. This is a long byproduct of water that is coming more from the discussion that is on the headlines, like, i.e. what's going on with Lake Mead and the like. So.
Mr. Miller?
Carl, I realize this isn't your purview, so I'll ask Bill. When we have an accident injury report like this, I mean, it's not clear who filled this out. So, you know, is this just some innocent bystander, or was this done by the safety coordinator after the fact? It doesn't, there's no signature or anything on it, so I don't know where this obviously got into the system somehow.
Right. I'm not in possession, but Carl will show me. Any accident or incident claims are signed off on by all of our staff involved, all the departments involved, whether it's a safety issue. They all come to me eventually for final signature. So I'm not sure. I mean, we experience slip, trips, and falls throughout our facilities. People getting on and off exercise equipment, treadmills, those types of things. It happens.
So at a place like this, like the softball field, who would be responsible for filling this out?
Typically, it would be the witnesses bringing it forward to one of our departmental leads at the particular facility that they're managing. So whoever the lead is at the Kuntz facility at the time that was on site there would have taken that report. Witnesses would have hopefully filled out some information there as to what happened, weather conditions, those types of things. Was the facility wet? Was the metal wet? Those types of things are all kind of documented as far as that goes.
Yeah, and they have that in here. Where I'm going with this is, you know, of the requests that I see, the one that I kind of resonate with the most is the bleacher renovation, because we are a community of older people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I look at something like this to help increase mobility and frankly to improve the safety of the situation. And I just wondered, you know, if we have a history of this kind of incident in the bleachers, I would have thought that we could go back and look at that and see, you know, are we talking about one every 5 years or one every 5 months or whatever? And
we typically do. I mean, we do have a safety committee, and these are logged. Carl, if you want to comment on that, you feel free.
So 5.5 years of being here, if we have a repetitive area where we have an injury report done, and we take that data, change is made. Facilities maintenance department generally makes that change. And a perfect example is that we've collected that style of data for the R.H. Johnson Pool Center. And last year, I changed 100% of the tile throughout the whole entire pool. I do not have, in 5 years of being here, a handful of these reports coming across Russ's and my desk.
You just answered my question.
Very good. And I will say, too, that the new design of the bleachers is significantly similar to the old design. They're just newer, a little bit more modern. They do create, though, a much better ADA access from the upper sidewalk and parking lot. That is a significant fact. But on the first base side, bleachers are bleachers. They haven't changed so significantly that we're not going to still have edges, rails, tripping points, and that is what this report states here. This report also came as part of the packet from the softball club as an example of why they were requesting this. So, thank you.
Mr. Bignato?
I want to go back to the request for the artificial turf in the softball field, and I'm not sure I've understood the figure of $25,000 a year for maintenance. Is that all it costs us approximately right now to take care of the grass?
No, it's much higher. But what Carl alluded to was, given the shortage of staff that Todd's dealing with for his, maintenance of these facilities, he's short. He's going to just redeploy that. This, for the most part, was seed, chemicals, and an estimate. It's hard to explain this, but there's a lot of meters spread out over Koontz. And we took, I think it's $30,000 a year for the overall, maybe $40,000 for the overall water. And we just had to make an estimate of what the water usage was for that turf. And I think we put into our modeling about 10,000. So 15,000 for grass, but not a dime. And I believe we'd be correct in doing that, to say that Todd's just gonna redeploy his guys. He has nobody assigned to that yard. He just assigns the task. So to think they'll go away, I think is a stretch. So we did not include it.
Understood. That's where I was confused. Thank you.
Any other questions? If you'd proceed, Carl.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Okay, now moving on into new capital. Okay, can you please advance that slide for me, Cliff? Am I overriding you? Thank you very much. Beardsley Arts and Crafts shade concrete, shade canopy and concrete, $45,000. Remove and replace existing concrete area, install decorative pavers, excavate and pour footings for shade structure, install 4-post steel powder coated structure, 18 by 31, and there was no change. Next slide. Desert Trails Pro Shop. Storage area structure roof, $45,000. Patio shade structure, $30,000. You'll see in the upper right-hand picture, the storage area would allow us to create 500 square foot of dry storage. This is very similar that we have at all of our other pro shops. If they have a masonry courtyard, virtually all of them have a metal roof over them. And then the patio canopy to the right gives us an increased 256 square foot of shaded canopy space with 546 square foot of additional patio space. And this is an identical project, as you see in the lower right-hand picture, to Deer Valley. Next slide, please. R.H. Johnson pickup truck. I just wanted to give a little levity to the room. Hope everybody's awake, but we have a new pickup truck that is required for the supervisor and facility leads to conduct business here at R.H. Johnson. Next slide. This is a new request put in for the November discussion here. R.H. Johnson Social Hall ceiling, lighting, renovation, design, engineering. We have an aged structure inside the social hall. It is comprised of a angled ceiling for sound purposes and has a sound deflecting tile that is no longer made. Now, if you walk the social hall today, you'll see that it's a little dingy and it's but in relatively good condition. We would like to go into a year of a bit of design and engineering to evaluate removing that ceiling and going to a modern sound-resistant ceiling done by professionals, raise it up, make it a little bit taller in the room. Russ's staff has very limited supply on being able to repair and replace any more of the ceiling tiles. They don't make it anymore, and professionals don't build that kind of ceiling anymore. The second portion of this is, right now I'm working on the lighting renovation throughout the rec centers, and after further discussion here, the electrical vendor that we've hired has come back to us and said, I cannot solve your dimmability request. I can replace the light bulbs in these lights, but because of the design of this ceiling, those fixtures don't exist from a replacement standpoint. So we would like to take a step back. The vendor is willing to give us the exact agreement's value, so give us a deductive credit of just approximately $60,000, and we would hold back them funds to a further date and have this discussion of design engineering and then apply those dollars to a new lighting. The benefit of doing this is we get a new ceiling somewhere in the future budget years. It would be taller. The tiles that can be chosen are all the way up to a 95% sound reduction. We do not have to have a beveled ceiling like you see anymore. You could have design if you would like, but otherwise the most cost-effective is just a raised flat ceiling with the appropriate tile, and I will not need nearly as many lights in the room as exists today. This lighting system is only because of the way the current roof is ceiling is designed. I do project that in a future budget on 24-25 to be probably in a discussion place of $300,000 to $400,000, because the elements prescribed would be ceiling work, lighting work, sound work, and some sprinkler head and air conditioning modifications. So I'm asking for $25,000 to be placed in the budget for architectural and design documentation. Moving on. FY23-24 proposed Lizard Acre sound system, $21,000. This sound system does not exist in the Lizard Acres area. The sound system does exist in the sports pavilion, so that is why this is under new. And then staff has asked for a storage container to be installed in the environmental services yard east of the social hall. Next slide. Our next portion is repair and replacement. R.H. Johnson Parking Lot 3, approximately 300 square foot of asphalt to be milled and replaced. Cost per square foot does reflect anticipated soil stabilization for the entire lot. So this year we did have a similar budget for the library, and we spent every bit of it plus a facts and findings for the governing board for an additional $70,000. So again, with the unknowns of soil stabilization, we are anticipating that this needs it the same way as the Lot 2 that we just finished. And we are asking for $978,500. Next slide. This is the Coon softball field outfield fence replacement we discussed moments ago. 520 linear feet of existing fence to be replaced to a height of 30 feet high, which is 6 feet higher than it currently exists. New crash pads, mounting bars for the advertising wall pads with or without advertising is to be determined. Again, this is not falling over. It exists. It is in our tool as a repair and replacement asset. So your recommendation is for the best timing for this project, and I do recommend that if this is being done, then the artificial turf be considered. Moving on to Beardsley Arts and Crafts parking lot, $412,000 for 120,000 square foot of parking lot. This also reflects anticipated soil stabilization, but at a minimal. Our history here of the previous parking lot, it did not have a significant impact that was required due to stabilizing the soil. So I'm taking a more conservative approach here. So $412,000 for arts and crafts parking lot. Next slide. Palm Ridge pickleball light fixtures, $309,000. A question was asked about providing information about savings. So we are replacing metal halide system with LED fixtures. It does require a retrofit to the poles and supporting arms and hardware. So this is not just a pull the bulb out and throw a new bulb in and have energy conserving figures. So there is some retrofit that's necessary. So it's a little harder to get a ROI than we would from what I'm doing here in these room conversions with lighting and some of the other sporting areas. However, though, Musco Product Assurance and Warranty Program eliminates 100% maintenance and labor for 10 years, and they have been true to that warranty and commitment in every place that we've used them to date. The fact of the matter is that the fixtures do provide a 40% energy reduction LED wattage. Next slide. Sports pavilions, bowling lanes, nothing has changed here. $278,226, replacing all of the lanes, the 30 lanes in the bowling alley. R.A. Johnson pool deck resurface, rubber deck, a little more information. This is 13,810 square feet of surface to be replaced. We do have included in quotations the RC11 coating to help ease maintenance and cleanability and durability. That is a product that was not available during the Kuntz installation, but has been used on the end of the pool at Beardsley. So we are seeing a difference in the ease of cleaning. Granted, Beardsley doesn't get quite the traffic that Kuntz does, but everybody's been quite pleased with the Kuntz pool deck as far as the product that's been used to date. R.H. Johnson bocce courts. This has taken a significant change from our October meeting to November. As you can see here, we've went from $51,346 to $197,600. This is 13 courts, 12,000 square foot of padded artificial turf. So it's not just like the mini golf next to it, where you just tear out the old artificial turf and install new. There's actually a pad for bocce ball. And this does include the replacement of Trex perimeter if needed. We did have a conversation with the bocce club, and we are looking at alternatives to Trex and possibly having a permanent concrete curb around those courts. There are certain benefits to that, but there's also some cost increases in doing that. So I'm currently investigating that, and there'll be more to come in the future months. Grandview Pro Shop parking lot mill and replacement, $166,880, 53,874 square foot, and this also has a minimal anticipated soil stabilization. I've had 100% of our courses require some stabilization to date. Trail Ridge, $159,650, 53,000 square foot, and also the minimal anticipated soil stabilization reflected in that cost. 10 cardio pieces of equipment over at Beardsley Fitness Room, $123,000. Sports Pavilion bowling ball return replacement. This is together with the lanes replacement, $108,948. A slight increase in the pool heater replacement, $77,250 from the original $48,834. Metal shop roof tile replacement, $51,500, and the flat roof. You can see the current conditions of the roof. We have a new addition with a brand-new roof attached to the metal shop, and this brings us up to our favorable roof restoration program for our buildings. And then finally, these last 6 items are the items under $50,000. Clay Club flooring replacement, $36,000. HVAC units, minimal amount of units this next season, $30,000. Memos, cabinets, and countertop replacement, $25,000. Bowling area sound system. This is the existing sound system upgrade, $20,259. An automatic scrubbing machine for Beardsley, $14,000. And the lawn bowling flat roof restoration, $9,004. Any questions on R&R?
Ms. Brown?
Carl, I did have one question on the pickleball lighting fixtures. You said that there would be warranty program and no maintenance for 10 years. Do we have any savings from that?
I would say the perceived savings in that is that if we don't do the project, we don't have that kind of a 10-year guarantee where every 2 years, Byron Jones, who's our supervisor of maintenance, quotes that we spend about $156 to $200 on bulb replacement per fixture. So I didn't do the math that way because it's a bit of an unknown. Some fixtures last 4 or 5 years, but a metal halide is expensive and the driver is expensive. So this is a tough one to get an ROI out of compared to some of the other, like our parking lot has been a great ROI. The interior room lighting is a great return of investment. But this one has some costs that it'll take more than the average 5 to 7 years to get a return of investment. So. Okay, moving on to R&R for golf. We have the golf maintenance equipment. It was significantly reviewed by staff and the CFO, and equipment is $1,078,269, 19 pieces, and average $154,000 per course. An add-on project was the Stardust number 14 shoreline repair and replacement, $231,855. This expenditure was submitted for $105K grant from the Arizona Department of Tourism. Echo Mesa irrigation system design work, just like we did for Grand. This is a jump start on fees for Echo Mesa's irrigation replacement and deturfing, which is scheduled for the fiscal year 24-25, $206,000. Utility vehicles, CFO and Todd Patty again did an inventory reduction review, and we have brought this back to you at $167,589 for 7 vehicles, an average of $24,000 per course. Golf ops, nothing has changed here. 20 golf cart replacement, $123,600. Grandview Golf Course cart path slurry seal, bit of an increase in slurry costs from year to year, so $87,550 since the last time this was done. And here are the final items under R&R for golf. Mower bank, Toro, pickup truck, Chevrolet, Grandview Golf Course Lake Aeration number 6 and 8, Trail Ridge ball picker, and Desert Trails golf cart utility hauler. Any questions for golfs?
I do. The 20 golf carts, that's over and above the 20 we bought last year?
We're on a cycle. There's about 145 carts. Beginning 3 years ago, we now cycle 25 or 20 a year.
If there are no further questions, the last section is the allowances, and nothing has changed since last month's discussion. Any questions on allowances?
Brown, Ms. Brown?
Not on the allowances, but one thing I forgot to ask, going back to the pickup truck for RH Johnson, that is new then? That's not a
That is a new
replacement?
vehicle, does not exist in our inventory.
Okay, and what's the need for that?
Russ explained to me that currently, due to shifting of staff and vehicles needed in other locations, R.H. Johnson is without their staff members having a pickup truck for hauling trailers and chairs and stuff like that.
Okay, do these vehicles stay on our property at night?
They do.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not saying that some staff members don't have an agreement, for driving it home or whatnot, but all vehicles that are not relevant to that agreement with the general manager are here and locked up in a yard.
Nick, I might make 2 clarifications.
Yes.
You guys know already you're a recommendation committee. The board, however, as part of policy reviews all items individually and improves each one over 100,000 individually. And so as you guys do your recommendations on those 100,000s, I hope you'll do something similarly in the process. Good news, and not to necessarily ice it, but you notice that the item for the lake shoreline at Stardust was for part of the application for a $105,000 grant. We actually received those dollars yesterday. And so when you submit your grant, there is some modification ability, but not a lot. So this project was one of, Stardust has already been redone on almost all of its shorelines and things like that. So you had a limited amount apart from, you guys are seeing that it's cycled to be a full irrigation, but we have to spend these monies before FY24, meaning April of 24. So I hate to ice it, but this money almost has to be directed towards what they are requesting here.
So that's the $231,000.
It is. I'm not sure I'd have to give the $105,000 back without further discussion, but let's just say this is what was submitted. So
So it would be in the
your
100.
approval would make it a lot easier and not even risk. I don't know if I'm saying this correctly, that we'd have to refund it, but that's a possibility.
So it'd be roughly 115,000 then, 116,000.
Without complicating it too much, Dick,
200.
we still approve all items
Okay.
for the 230.
Okay.
The extraneous dollars, savings, are all just completely in different parts of the income statement
Okay.
and
Ms.
balance
Brown?
sheet.
Brown.
Pete, so is that 440,000 that you received yesterday, will that be deposited and be made part of the monies received in this current fiscal year?
The cash is definitely received. In about, I think tomorrow, we've already convened discussions with accounting staff, with Todd and Dan Maurer, to actually address this very thing, is to what's been expended that we can pull the receipts in and submit it for our audit. Of course, the tourism's not going to send the money and not expect some verification.
Right.
Grandview is one that's already pretty much behind us. We've already expended a lot of effort in that irrigation project for the pumps and other water-saving initiatives. But to answer your question, we've got a lot of it still in front of us. This one almost for sure. The other two, don't hold me to the courses. But we have to develop how we're going to tie into what they submitted and when that happens, and the reflection and the revenue recognition or the whatever we're going to do with it is all still in front of us. We actually didn't necessarily expect this check, but the funds have been received. Now we will very clearly tell you what we do with each item when it happens, once we know more. So.
Carl, I'm sorry. Mr. Bosak.
I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, Carl. The capital items, 10,827,000. Capital improvement projects, 8,423,000.
That might be prior year. Is that what?
No.
Oh,
just
sorry.
What he's presented to us, the upfront, the 10 million aid ballooned by the 6.6 million for Grandview.
I'm not sure where you're seeing the
That
10
might
Well,
be-
million.
that's the page you gave us up front.
Yeah, I think you're referencing the current year. I may be wrong. That's.
Okay, so that 10 million eight is the current year.
Current year.
And that's where what we've sent purchase orders out
10
and what we're
million
obligated
one,
for already. Okay.
Grandview, the whole shebang.
And then the 8 million four is next year.
This
Next to
proposed
24.
discussion right
Okay.
now.
I don't envy you.
So between October and November, we had a reduction in $568,283 in reviewing of this proposed budget,
Right.
of all the changes I discussed with you. That concludes my report.
Excuse me, Mr. Miller?
So this is a technical question. Tell me what soil stabilization actually
Very good.
encompasses.
So soils has a characteristic, good,
Right.
bad, or indifferent. And once you expose the soils, so in our case, when we tear out the asphalt, whatever previous history when that went down. So when Del Webb built this, we have different soils conditions in different areas. Here at the rec center, when we pulled it out, it was like a sand dunes. It was a sandbox, and it had moisture in it, but as soon as you drove a vehicle on it, the tire sunk in. You can't put new asphalt down on that. So there's multiple ways of stabilizing soil. Some are excavate the old, put a geomat of some sort in, and put new aggregate base back in. That if it's small, that's cost effective. If it's large, it's not cost effective. You can imagine all the import. So in our case, because we have this massive parking lot, what they do is they bring in a machine that lays down virtually an inch of Portland cement all the way across the whole parking lot, and then they come with another vehicle and they churn it with water. And they're basically creating a very light slurry, if you will, that dries within hours or the day. And that stabilizes it with compaction of the next step of vehicles, and now they can lay asphalt over the top of it. So and I'll give you an example of a failure point is due to the high traffic during that process over at Pickleball in the curve. We had a lot of their own vehicles driving back and forth to perform their work that they ruined their own stabilization, and I'm actually seeing the unstable effect where the asphalt is cracking a bit, and they're happily coming back, and they're going to remove and repair that. So, but otherwise, we've had a very successful install. And I've had all the other measures that I mentioned in other locations done. So I've done mat stabilization, I've done stabilization using lime. I've done export the soils and put new soils in. So we've tried it all, and it's successful.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Carl, do you have anything else for us?
I have nothing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm here for any other questions, though.
We're going to take a 5-minute bio break, and we'll be back 5 minutes, no more. And we're going to start discussion on committee discussions on the what we've just heard on the capital budget planning. at 11:31. Carl, thank you for an excellent presentation. Thank you for all the work that you're doing on this. You've given us a lot to think about and a lot to talk about. So let's go ahead and proceed. My opening comments are going to be that we need to be very cautious right now, financially cautious. If we look at the total is $8.4 million in new capital investment, and that's that's one of the things that we can control is the new capital expenditure. Pete told us that. He reminded us of that. We all knew that. I think we need to take a very serious, hard look at that. I would like to go through all of the capital projects, especially those over $50,000. And we're going to start with the very first will be softball. Softball has several items on here. And I think that we'll just start with, well, we used the spreadsheet that Carl presented to us, and so it's a softball field clubhouse expansion project is for $1 million. The way I plan to do this on the softball and some of the other capital projects that we're concerned about or that are over $50,000, I'd like to do a roll call vote on that. So our roll call consensus. All right, so I'm going to open it up for the clubhouse expansion. Does anyone want to comment? Are we ready to make a, okay, we'll start with you, Mr. Bagnato.
No.
Mr. Howald?
Delay.
Ms. Brown?
That's a no for next,
Thank
for
you.
next year.
Yeah. Ms. Brown?
No.
Ms. Redmond?
No for next year, but delay it.
Mr. Bosak?
I agree with that delay.
Dr. Miller?
No.
Next item. Next item, softball bleacher access, bleacher area renovation. Any comments on that at all? Okay. Dr. Miller?
No.
Bosak?
Yes.
Defer,
Is the defer a no for the year?
that is correct.
Okay.
No for the year.
Okay, Ms. Brown?
No, but a delay.
No and delay.
Yes.
So we have 2 yes, and we have 4 no. Okay. 2 yes. This is
Okay.
third item, artificial turf. We'll start with Mr. Yes, comments?
I'd like to make a comment on this. I believe that if this is done, it needs to be done when the fencing is done. Now, I understood Carl to say that the fencing is not falling down. I don't know what kind of condition it's in, and I don't want it falling down on someone. But if the fencing is something we could delay, I would delay the artificial turf, and I would not do the artificial turf unless we did the fencing. So that's, I kind of look at them as a package, although one is new and one is a repair and replacement, but together they come to 1 million. And what we're looking at for next year being almost 8.5 million, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do all of that. So that's just my comment on this.
Do I have any other comments on that? Okay, Mr. Bosak.
Based on Pete's comment, for years we've heard Todd talking about this grass that is more heat resistant. And even when I was on the golf committee, we pushed him to at least do a course. Everybody's thinking about the seed that needs to be developed to accomplish this, and as far as I know, it's being tried in other places. I don't know where, but I know it's being tried. This might be a great place to try it in a very small amount instead of doing a golf course, and we'd see very quickly whether it was something we'd be interested in. It's more expensive than the current, but if it doesn't have to cost us $250,000 to oversee the course, tremendous savings for the community.
Mr. Hobold?
I really like that idea. Running a pilot program on something and letting time play out to see if there's some subsidies available in the future that would subsidize the synthetic we wanted. I think we get the best of both if we follow your advice.
There's one more wild card. It's a relatively minor one. Advertising is on that fence. Carl probably could tell me whether or not that's easily dismantled and they do their work and they reassemble it. But if you were to defer the project of the fence and all these other ones to bring forward, most likely they would start to align up with the termination of these ad rentals that are happening on those fences. And we probably wouldn't have as much removal and replacement onto a brand new fence. So it's not I don't believe it would be a game stopper, but just something else to put into your thought process. So
Actually, I hadn't really thought about that. The, are those on a time, it's a contract, X number of years?
yes, I believe I'm correct in this, that we have not initiated any new advertising in the year plus. So the maximum contract that was ever initiated on any advertising, you're up here, you can affirm that for me, but I'm pretty sure it's 3 years. And if I understood it right, it would be like August of '24 when the last one would be still eligible, or whatever the right word is, still being funded.
Ms. Brown?
Pete, could you have that information available when the governing board looks at this? Thank you.
Cliff, am I correct on that? I believe I'm right, yeah. But yes, we'll get that.
That actually might be a good time to revisit the following fiscal year. Okay. Any other comments? Mr. Bugnado?
Question I have regarding special grass seeds that may be more tolerant. I would be concerned, since many of these grass seeds are going to be developed specifically for the golf world and may not necessarily be suitable for a softball field. And so I think that question needs to be asked as well.
That's a good point. Dr. Miller?
Yeah, the fence, you're gonna make it 6 feet higher. Is that because we have some monster softball players that are driving balls into people's backyards? I mean, what's the motivation for raising the fence height?
Priority number one is R&R. The fence is in poor condition. It's not unsafe. It's not falling down. And since the investment would get made into replacing it, it has been brought to our attention that instead of having the additional 4, 5, 6 feet of wire or fabric mesh that's up there, we just build it to 30 foot. So, and it is because the average player is hitting harder and further and longer and higher.
So the fence as it is now is already high at that same 30-foot height, but just the top of it is not necessarily chain link, is that correct?
Right now, it's a very small portion has an additional 6 foot of netting, and the other part is 24 foot.
So I think the discussion leads us to options, one of which is to explore the use of the hybrid seed. And the other is to couple the turf replacement or the decision on using hybrid seed versus turf, and to extend it to 25, when all of if there were any contracts that went beyond that for the signage, that would have expired.
I seem to recall reading someplace where once the current contract's expired, there would be no more advertising on the outfield fence. So Ann is nodding with me. That's what I think I've seen.
I'm not sure if that's the decision. I know that it was going to be. Do you know, Pete?
That's what I was saying earlier, that for well over a year, we've not initiated any renewals.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Okay. Yeah.
So then why not wait till all the contracts are expired and then we don't have to deal with taking signs down and putting them back?
So you're suggesting that we postpone the decision on replacement until after the last contract expires for the signage?
That's my feeling, which would also then perhaps
Right.
defer any
Right.
investment in artificial turf and give us time to determine if this type of a grass seed, these hybrids, would even be suitable. So I think we need more information before we can really make a complete decision. And since we have to decide today, we might have to just defer both of those projects.
I think we have someone from the softball club here.
Yes, I just want to talk about the advertisement. Yes, they've stopped us from doing that advertisement. I don't think that should be a variable you even consider, because my guys could pull down those signs within an hour.
And I made that point, that don't know a lot about it.
But it's not an issue anymore with the guidance we have from the rec center that we cannot sell those anymore because of our CR7 classification.
Do you have a responsibility to leave the signs up through the expiration of the contract?
We do, but we've negotiated with those people also, and they understand the ramifications of what's happening with the contract. So we'd have to negotiate that with Speed and with, because they're halfers on those with us. But no other money's coming in right now.
So then I think where we are is that we need to decide whether we want to delay until we can get a decision or a position on the hybrid seed relative to the turf, and whether we want to cluster or package the turf and the fence together. Mr. Hurley?
Yes, just a point of order, Dick. What the question before your committee now is, are you going to recommend or not recommend this to go to the governing board? Anything that happens later, you can't really delay anything. It will be put into the next budget if the general manager is so inclined, okay?
Thank you for the clarity.
Yep.
Okay. So now we're going to, do we want to move this forward to the governing board? Yes or no? Start with Mr. Bignato.
No.
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 Ms.
No,
Bosan?
no, but I would like to acknowledge that the softball club has spent a lot of money over the years making their own improvements. And again, it's one of those no fault of your own, where this tax thing got you caught, and just like pickleball, and you've been put in a position where you can't do that anymore. So it's not, we're not debating the worthiness of your proposal, it's the timing, I think, more than anything.
No,
Mr. Miller?
no.
So it's unanimous. So unanimous, no. The next is the batting cages. Do we need discussion? Mr. Miller?
I'm going to say yes on this one.
Yes?
No.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
So 4-2. I think now we'll go now, and if you have, as committee members, if you have any particular item that you wish to point out or to discuss, this would be the time to do it. Ms. Brown?
Yes, Chairman Rhodes, could we do a roll call on the softball field outfield fence replacement, since we had discussed that earlier?
That's R&R, and that's the second line item. Mr. Bignato?
No.
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 Okay, it's unanimous, no. Do we have any other issues? Any other projects? Ms. Redmond?
Concerns about the parking lots being repaid. Is it absolutely necessary that that be done at this time? There's some significant dollars involved here. Given, you know, the economy, and we don't have a crystal ball, let's face it, we really don't know what's going to happen with the rest of the year. Is this something that we can put off for another year without causing any problems with the parking lots themselves? And
I guess we're going to have to ask Carl that question.
yeah.
This is a two-part question, so no, our parking lots are maintained to a level that they are safe. So, under the review of their condition and their age, they're in the same worthy condition that the reasoning we made to replace the others. However, this is an R&R replacement item, and by choosing to push it down the road, you are making yourself open to the inflationary factor. So again, I recommend that they get done, and we get this over with, and we're finishing our program of R&R for our parking lots, which we are virtually complete, and not push this down the road.
Do you have any response?
Thank you.
I think that's a really important part that he just made. When we were discussing the presentation, I'm glad this opportunity came up, because I know when I got here 3.5 years ago, I was somewhat, I mean, came from hospitals background that had big parking lots, but when I first looked at what the replacement cost of these three, it's close to $3 million, maybe 2.5. We just did Palm Ridge. You know, the Coons expansion brought on not only a new parking lot, but we did all the other ones, and Beardsley will be done with this. I don't know all 7, but I think Carl's correct, and I think, Frank, you alluded to wanting this Trail Ridge, I think, brought up, because it was maybe in not as good a shape as you were hoping. I think what this does, I mean, I'm being Mr. Obvious here, but we've expended the effort to get all of these replaced after many of them were original, you know, when the association was developed. So I give Carl quite a bit. Now we move into seal and stripe mode, and from a capital perspective, that's why I was asking you earlier, or pointing out to you earlier, that when you start looking 5-6 years out, we don't have big spends happening in our parking lot arena. And so that's why you get some cash flow replenishment. It doesn't mean that the second that we finish this lot, it starts on a 30-year replenishment to have the monies available, but cash flow out the door to do it, you're not being requested. And I know that's a little bit accounting speak, but hopefully we've given you guys enough understanding how that reserve study works, that you can, but I think the question of inflation can go both ways. I brought it up earlier that, right now, it's pretty bad out there. Oil is much higher than we got it for when we did all our lots 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, we benefited from that. And it's a flipping a coin, Susan. Whether you want to take a flyer that it comes down, it's not impractical to think about, but
Thank you.
And I would just like to add one other comment. Out of all of the parking lots here, other than Trail Ridge, I'm not sure what my evaluation would be. I just know that it's old and aged, but Beardsley certainly would be the one where I'd have to do a few repairs, and it would just be a cost over the next year or two if we deferred it. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to make a comment about R&R. I have mixed feelings on that, and I really appreciate the fact that, and the encouragement to go ahead and put projects on schedule for replacement. I think I've always thought that's the right answer. And sometimes it looks like we're excessive to what we do, but I'm not so sure at the end of the day that that's really the case. So I think I would support the R&R scheduling. I know that Carl, you and the other staff members take a very serious look at that, and we really have to rely on your expertise for that. So that's my editorial comment to add to the whole process here.
I would just like to make one comment about the parking lots, because I think a free and frank discussion about it is healthy for everybody. I'm in favor of those for 2 reasons. One is they affect a great many people in the community, not just a small segment of a couple hundred people or one club or whatever, because they affect a lot of people, especially the rec center parking lots. The other piece of it is that I think I hate to say that a parking lot enhances the beauty of the community, but I do think there is such a thing as keeping the externals, that when people drive through here, that they get a good, favorable impression of the community in terms of keeping the paint fresh, so to speak. So those are my 2 reasons why I think it's money well spent.
Thank you.
Are we ready to poll our committee, Mr. Brignano?
Carl, did I understand correctly, as far as the Beardsley lot goes, that perhaps we can get by a little longer with just having some repairs made?
In the end, if that is the governing board's decision to defer that project after all committees make their recommendations, yes, that parking lot is going to survive like any other parking lots. We do our due diligence to stay on a 3 and 4 year seal and stripe schedule to make sure that they're safe, sealed. Beardsley is the only one that I do have 2 areas, the entry drives, that are crumbling each year, and we do little patches. I have an area that's due for a larger patch. So it's just that that particular lot was actually scheduled to be done 2 years from now, and we have moved it up in the schedule. So Trail Ridge, overall, if you look at that one, it's crumble pie. It's safe, but yes, it is. So, and it happened to be one of our last golf course parking lots on the schedule, so it's convenient timing for it to crumble.
Thank you. So let's, Mr. Bagnato, should we forward our?
Maybe sure
yes,
I know what I guess you were doing it so perfectly on the new. I guess I thought you were gonna go, 100,000 or 50,000 line items with each vote.
Yeah. I don't want to go line item by line item, but I would ask that we look at the $50,000 and under items and ask if you have concern or questions about them.
He said under.
Are you looking at the new?
The new, yeah.
I just think it would be helpful when the board sees this, if we knew what were wants and what are needs. And I know that can be interpreted different ways by different people, but I think that's a good delineation to have.
Did you want that for future meeting or opine on it right now?
What's that?
Do you want us to opine on it right now, or?
No, I just think it's something that the board will need, because the board will have the final decision on what goes forward, but I think they will need to know. And all B&F can do is just make a recommendation.
Absolutely.
Does the committee have any particular concern or want to discuss any particular line item?
Question.
Mr. Bosak?
Carl, I applaud you for going through all this and saving almost $600,000 from the original estimate. I know Todd's maintenance people, his repair people, have been keeping some of their equipment together with duct tape and wiring. The $310,000 that you're able to take out of that, is that primarily equipment that affects the golf course itself, or are we talking transportation vehicles and that kind of thing?
Pete will have to
Yeah, I was
respond
gonna
to this.
say, this was my world. They did their due diligence beyond the initial, the budget, the reserve study prompts into the arena of Todd and Dan Maurer to evaluate. I made this, I think I wasn't super clear about it, but on our first pass, I mentioned that they were in overseeding and doing some other projects, that they had not done the in-depth analysis of mower A. Can it have more functionality for 1 more year, even 2, and sometimes even 3 more years? That's what occurred between the initial presentation and today. So that's all my world, and none of them went away. They just, maybe 1 or 2 did on it, but most of them moved out at several years, and that's exactly what you would want us to do.
Mr. Bagnado?
Going back to wants and needs, and looking at these new items under 50,000, there's 2 requests in here for Desert Trails, asking for $75,000. That's all well and good, but Desert Trails has existed for quite a while without these things, and so, again, are these needs or wants? The other question I had was 21,000. I realize they're small amounts in the grand scheme of things, but when it comes to Lizard Acres pubs, it seems to me that they're not having any trouble attracting patrons with the existing sound system, and so again, is this a need or is it a want?
I do not believe that the Lizard Cafe has a sound system. What they're getting is, if they bring in a band, they're using the speakers. The entertainers are bringing in their own equipment, and that's what they're using. And from what I understand, it's somewhat of a problem, which would go away by having a sound system. Also, too, going to the issue of how many people it is benefiting, from what I understand, the Lizard Cafe has gotten very, very popular, and you can't get a seat unless you go at 4:30 in the afternoon. Pardon? I didn't say that. But to me, this seems like it's a need.
Do we have any other comments? Mr. Miller?
So, Carl, the pro shop storage area roof structure, tell me more about what does that accomplish if we do that?
Currently, when we have little masonry compounds, over the last 6 years that I've been here, the golf ops or the golf shop manager has asked for a steel structure. Some of the steel structures covering those areas existed well before my time. But however they're doing their daily operations, they have dry goods outside. And at this particular lot, they have the pro shop, a back door, an open storage area, and then a door into the golf cart garage. So by putting a steel structure over that, they can put various amount of product, kegs, all kinds of stuff outside that they don't currently store outside, or they take up garage space. I performed this same project at Pebblebrook. It's been very well received. If you were to view it, you'll see that it is filled with good things and well used. So,
Okay, so it's something that enhances their ability to perform their function.
that is correct. Yep.
Okay.
I would say the patio shade structure is the more of the desire. So
Well, yeah, I
that's-
mean, I've sat on the patio at Desert Trails as it stands right now, and,
Yep.
you know, this would be nice to have, but it's not something that's gonna break us if we don't do that.
That's correct.
Okay.
Are we ready to reach consensus on this? So we need to, with the exception of the 4 items on the softball, the clubhouse, the bleachers, the artificial turf, and the batting cages, and those were all, we had a roll call vote on that, and all of them were voted not to forward.
I thought the clubhouse went forward.
We did not?
The cages, I mean.
No, the cages were 4 to 2. Oh, it's 4 to 2 positive, I'm sorry.
It was the fencing.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I turned that around. 4 to 2, yes. Okay, I'm sorry.
But the fencing.
The fencing was, on the R&R was a 6-0. The bleachers was actually, it was a 4-2 no. And the clubhouse was a 6-0 no. And the turf was, oh, I don't.
6 no.
6-0
Oh,
no.
I'm sorry. Okay, I thought you talked about. Yeah, the turf was 6 no,
6-0 no, okay.
along with the fence under R&R.
That's correct. No, yeah, correct, okay. So the only one that we would move forward is the batting cages.
Right.
Okay? So we need to move this to the governing board to forward this to recommendation to forward it to the governing board. Okay, Mr. Bognato? Yes. Mr. Hobart?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes, okay. So we have unanimous to move everything forward with the exception of the 3 items that I explained. We have one item left, and I think we should do it because it's a review of 2 policies, and both of the policies have no change to them. So I'm going to ask, I think I'd like to proceed to that. This would be item 5.03, Budget and Policy Review, FY11. Is that, that's yours?
Yeah, I mean, I read this over. This is a very short, succinct financial policy. It does reference FY10, which we had looked at for Gary, I think had done that one. And there was a slight change in FY10, but it would have no impact on FY11. So I really see this is well-written, clearly lays out what needs to be done, and I recommend that we leave it as it is.
Okay, very good. Anyone have questions on that? Okay. FY17, Donald?
I looked this over, I had some questions. Dick and I went back and forth via email so that I was gotten some clarification. And in the end, the policy should stand as it is written, no changes.
Thank you. Do we have any questions on that? Yeah. Yes.
Excuse me, Frank, who did you say you talked with? Oh, Dick, okay. Did anybody at the rec centers have any input, like Deb Long, was she the one that? Yeah.
Pete, Mr. Finelli, you were involved with that. Did you review that with us?
In the past?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure, because as you can see, the prior revision dates on here, I know at least the last 4 of them were done by John Hobold, because he was on a committee that worked on it, but we had a lot of input from the rec center, so I just wanted to make sure that
So,
we had people there
and it's
who were involved in
working,
it on a day-to-day basis.
and it's working.
Okay, that's the
I'm
best
just gonna
thing.
point out that I got 1 refund request a month that would go into some kind of debate. Is this in over a year since whenever the adoption of this went into place? It's not hard, it's hard to debate. We get some people that press it, like but usually the policy defines whether or not we say yea or nay.
Good.
So I'd like to get consensus from the committee to forward this to governing board. Mr. Bernardo?
Yes?
Yes.
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 It's a unanimous, okay. We'd like to have comments, any comments that the committee wishes to offer? Ms. Brown?
I have one question. I didn't want to ask it when the folks from Brown and Brown were here, but when did we last review a third-party provider such as Brown and Brown?
This one is not specified, unlike other, portions. The one most notably, the investment advisor a year ago, and what we're dealing with right now on the accounting firm. This one is not specified. Answer to your question, on this particular one, we don't see the fees. So
You don't see what?
Yeah, they pay the insurance companies have that as part of their renewal.
Okay.
So we don't ever pay them a check for this. So as far as them contracted to be our negotiator, in my time, we have not introduced it. So, I'd be glad to, and I put it on the kind of the back burner. It's kind of hard to understand this a little bit. Sometimes you get close to the renewal period and you start to say, how am I going to, adopt a new person who has all this background knowledge and I'm not defending it, but we don't pay it, so it's maybe not as front and center. I'm not sure that's the best answer you want to hear, but
Well,
we've been very pleased with.
I don't know that it's necessary. I just think as our due diligence as a
Correct.
committee,
Correct.
that should be brought up.
Well, we know one thing, it's over $20,000.
We know another thing, they're probably glad Earl Mackert's not here.
Right.
Earl used to hold their.
One comment, I would like to thank Karen for the color copies. It was much easier to follow, and it probably made copying a little more complicated, but so please thank her.
So, Dick, I know you're going to want to, maybe your owner member or your committee members are going to want to throw something at me, but I'm not sure I understood the R&R portion of that capital. There was 10 other items on there that are 100,000 plus. We started to nibble on the edge of them when I think Susan was talking about a parking lot or two. But I know you want to throw something at me, but I'm not so sure you've defined whether or not those 7 or 8 other items got a yay or no, yay or nay. But
Well, yeah, no one,
if you're saying consensus to move all of them forward, then
yeah,
so be it.
that
Okay,
was
good.
that
Okay,
was the
very
intent.
good.
Yeah.
I thought you were concentrating more on new for some reason.
Well, I wanted to get the new, but,
Okay.
then we
Okay,
knew about the
beautiful. That's what actually clarifies it. Thank you.
So the last is, do we have anyone in the audience that we do not? Only the diehards in the back of the room. So our next meeting is November the 15th. It'll be at 9 a.m. in the lecture hall. I officially adjourn the meeting.
Okay.